Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Trendspotting, the Linchpin of Successful Strategy. Today's presenters are Scott and Bill Long of Stand-by-Ness, and they will be able to walk you through this presentation for the next hour. But before they do, just a few housekeeping items here. We do have two different audio options, one that streams over internet, and the other you can use a phone number to call in with an access code. So if you're having a little audio issue with one, please toggle to the other and give that one a try. We will be taking questions if we do have some time at the end of the presentation. Please insert those into the questions panel as we do not monitor the chat box. And if we do not get to those questions, we will have Scott or Bill reach out to you personally via email. We will have 3 polling questions throughout the presentation today. Please make sure you are answering those if you are looking for a CPE at the end of this presentation today. There are 2 handouts available, one being the presentation that we're going to walk through over the next hour, and another is a free tool that Scott and Bill will later go through. So make sure you find the handout section in the GoToWebinar panel and download both of those. Speaking of CPE again, we do use a third party to distribute these certificates. It's called SimpleCert. So give us 1 or 2 business days to be able to get these out to you. And if you don't see them, please check your junk or spam folders, as sometimes they like to jump into there. And if you don't receive those after a few days, just give us a shout and we will look into it for you. Additionally, we will have a survey at the end of the presentation. Please let us know how we did, insert any questions or comments that you may have had, and that is where you're going to indicate if you need that CPE credit. So without further ado, Scott, Bill, they're all yours for the next hour.
Great, thanks, Kaylee, I appreciate that. And good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, the central part of the US. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I know we have a number of you on the line today. I'm Bill Long. Although you can't see me, I'm a senior consultant with Stand-by-Ness. Been with the industry, the AEC industry, for over 35 years. Started on the design side, went on to the construction side. My entire career has been involved with designing, constructing, managing designer construction firms. I'm excited to be here today with my friend and colleague, Scott Butcher, to talk about a topic we're passionate about, and that's trend spotting. Let me turn over to Scott to introduce himself.
Hey, Bill, thank you. And I guess we probably shouldn't tell the audience that we met at Trend Spotters Anonymous. We'll just leave that detail out. No. So welcome, everybody. I'm Scott Butcher. I know we have a lot of returning folks from prior webinars, so great to see you back, and certainly a big welcome to our new ones here. I am the director of the Strategic Growth Advisory here at Stand-by-Ness. About 3 decades and some change in this industry, most of it on the side of design and construction firms before I moved into consulting. And I made the joke about Bill and I with Trend Spotters Anonymous, but for years, long before we worked together, Bill and I would get together regularly, and we would just talk about some of the trends that were happening in the industry. So we're really excited to be with you today and talk about this concept of trend spotting, because it's just so critical to the success of your firm. So if you've joined us in the past, you've probably heard us talk a little bit about the anticipatory organization. This is a book written by Daniel Burrus. We use it heavily around the office here. We're not going to go very in depth to it, but there's a couple things that we wanted to point out early on here, because we use it to create sort of a common vocabulary within the firm, as well as some of the tools to help interpret some trends. And as far as the vocabulary, we really look at trends in 2 different ways. There's hard trends and there are soft trends. And when we talk about a hard trend, it's essentially a future fact. It's going to happen. Demographics. Bad news, we're all going to get older. You can't stop it. It's a future fact. Technology, it's going to continue to evolve, and we're going to continue to struggle with it. True story. And regulations, it's as long as there are politicians, there will be regulations, and those regulations will be ever changing. So these are hard trends. We know they're going to happen. And then we have these soft trends, which they might happen, but we can insert, we being companies, we being industries, we being society in general, can insert some sort of influence upon whether the trend happens or not. So within these soft trends, we break it out further with hard assumptions and soft assumptions. And basically, a hard assumption means we have data. We did market research, we did a study, there's information that indicates that this trend is likely to take place. And a soft trend or soft assumption is just a gut feel. We want to stay away from the gut feels, but when it comes to strategy, which is why we're doing this research to begin with, the hard assumptions and the soft trends and then the hard trends are really where it lies at. That's where we want to focus. So just to give you a couple examples, hard trends, baby boomers retiring. You probably heard the statistic, 10,000 baby boomers every day turn 65. In 2 years, that'll be 12,000. Doesn't mean they're retiring at age 65, but it does show the demographic is growing within the retirement age. Greater use of automation. If you're a Revit using firm, this latest release, you now have generative design. Basically adding automation to the design process that could reduce human hours, but also allow us to get more productive. And of course, autonomous vehicles. They've been tested for years, a lot of name brand companies doing it, but these laws around them are going to have to evolve because most of the laws we have right now don't address self-driving vehicles. So that's a regulation change that is coming. On the soft trend side, hey, material price increases or decreases, what's happening out there? Well, inflation comes down, material prices should come down. But Bill and I were with a construction client 2 weeks ago, and we asked their chief estimator the question, hey, we're seeing from the wholesale level, the cost of wood is really dropping. What are you seeing? And he laughed and said, look, with inflation, logistic and supply chain issues, from the retail perspective, it hasn't changed at all. So the declining wood prices have not impacted construction costs yet. Recession, is it going to happen? Is it here? Pick a talking head to listen to. But, government is raising the prime lending rate. That impacts if there's going to be a recession, how deep the recession will be. So it's definitely a soft trend. And of course, the talent shortage. We have the talent shortage now, but with automation 10 years out, maybe with better recruitment, getting to students when they're young so they go into engineering or construction management or some of the trade skills, and they go up to the trade schools to be a mason or a carpenter, we can impact this talent shortage more so as an industry. So I want to share this example here, what it takes to be a successful engineering leader. It takes a lot of skills. The technical skills you see there, it's essentially the price of admission. You need the technical skills to get the job. But then to become a leader, you need the business skills, you need the people skills or the soft skills, and you need the leadership skills. And so bring this up because if we take this whole anticipatory organization and the required skills to be an anticipatory thinker, it really closely aligns with the skills you're already using for business, people, and leadership. So it just sort of requires a change in the way your thought process is directed from present focused or past focused to being a little more future focused. And then on top of all that, you layer in your problem solving skills and your continuous learning skills. And so, just wanted to share some of this information from the anticipatory organization. It's foundational. It's really the way we run the business here at Stambaugh & Ness. And the author, Daniel Burrus, lays out kind of a 4-step framework as part of anticipatory organization. You know what's next. You develop opportunities, leverage the knowledge that you've gained. That helps you shape the future, build the future, maybe even influence some of those soft trends. And then on the back end, revenue generation, firm growth, there's some success metrics that result from that. Today, Bill and I are just talking about trend spotting, knowing what's next. That's the focus for our next 50 minutes or so together.
Scott, that's a good point. What we really are trying to find out is what we think is next for the economy as a whole, next for the construction industry, next for our clients and our clients' industry. And the process to go through can be overwhelming. But what we're going to do for the remaining time of this webinar is really walk you through a 7-step process that kind of in sequential order, chronological order, takes you through the research process, the interpretation process, so you could spot those trends and then make recommendations for your firm, your design firm, your construction firm, as you go forward with your business planning, strategic planning, whatever initiatives you might have. We're going to start things off by, like you would for any initiative, whether it's a strategic plan or an initiative to open a new office, you want to establish goals. To be successful at any initiative, you need to establish goals. And we want to establish goals as to why we're doing this research. Why are we trying to spot those trends and interpret them? We'll go into a little more detail what some of those might be. Once we establish that, this is where the bulk of the work comes in for the trend spotting initiative. It's doing the research. And I suggest you're going to do it in 3 different areas, basically as the funnel suggesting, narrowing of areas. First, by starting out doing some macroeconomic, global research. Scott already talked about some of those hard trends, or there's soft trends based on hard assumptions that really fall into that. The demographic stuff, the inflationary stuff, all that information is research that's going to affect you and I and our firms. But then we want to narrow it down. We're going to take it through the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, construction. We're going to look at design and construction industry and see how that's being impacted and how that research can lead to some potential trends. Last thing you want to do is look at your client industries. Assuming most firms on this call have 2, 3, 4, 6, 12 client markets that they're in. You want to research them so you can find out what's happening there and identify those trends that are going to impact your business. Once you complete those 3 areas of research, you got to do a little filtering. Do we have enough information? Do we need more information? Do we have the right information? Is it just a series of data points, or is it something more we need to get so we can see and identify some trends? So we're going to show you some ways that you can filter it out. Once you filter through it, you have to interpret it. And this is kind of the key component of this whole process. We're going to talk about a number of different tools you could use. We're going to recommend one that you use, provide you some handouts as well as to how you interpret those trends, what they mean not only for our clients' industries, but then how it impacts our industry as the designer and builder of those projects. The last thing, as with any type of initiative, you want to take that last step and make recommendations based on your findings, whether that's to open a new office, maybe get out of a market, whatever it might be. But you want to then communicate those recommendations as well. Communicate it to your employees, communicate to upper management, whoever it might be. You want to make sure everybody's aware of what those recommendations find. So having said that, the 7 steps I think are an obvious way to go through the process. And let's start off right at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about goals. Scott?
Thanks, Bill. And you know, at the end of the day, what we're doing this for is it's going to help us gain a competitive advantage. It's going to provide us knowledge that we need to succeed. And so, you know, everything that we do in this research has to have a defined outcome. And really that centers around why you're doing the research. So there are so many different reasons that could potentially trigger research, but maybe you're doing an annual business plan or a strategic, 3 to 5 year business plan. With those, you want to make sure you have great foundational knowledge in the trends that are impacting the economy, the industry, and your client verticals. At Stanball Ness, as part of the strategic planning process, we actually do some of these trend workshops, anticipatory workshops, prior to getting together for a strategic planning retreat. It's just part of the process that we've adopted here because it is so important. If you're developing marketing plans or business development plans, and these don't even have to be plans, these can just be strategies. You need to be informed before you decide where you're going to go. So that's really important. Ongoing analysis. This isn't once and done. We need to continually be in touch with the markets, with the economy, what's happening today, what's projected tomorrow, how has that changed from week to week, month to month, year to year. And then there are some other triggers that almost always require research. So geographic market expansion, you want to move into a new city or into a new state, or perhaps you're looking at expanding your service lines. You offer, this kit of services here, but you're looking to extend by adding 1 or 2 new services or practice areas. Or maybe you want to add new industries or sectors that you're pursuing, right? You do, maybe higher education, commercial buildings, and you want to move into the healthcare sector. Or you do, roads, highways, and bridges, and you want to move into wastewater. These are all triggers for needing to conduct some research. So let's now go into these three components that Bill talked about, and we're going to start with the macroeconomic. What are these trends that are out there that we need to be paying attention to? And there's a whole world of data out there. It's what's happening with interest rates, what's happening with inflation, what's happening with trade, what's happening with the value of a dollar. But one of the areas that really impacts our industries that we have to pay attention to is what's happening here. In these single family residential neighborhoods, uh, if we were in person, Bill and I would ask the question, how many of you monitor what's going on in this market sector of single family residential? And if you're a civil engineering firm that does land development for residential neighborhoods, you're going to raise your hand, but usually few hands actually raise. And then we go through and say, well, okay, well, let's look bigger picture here. So new developments, you need roads. You need roads to get there, you need roads to get around. Well, if we have construction happening, we have manufacturing happening, the sticks, the bricks, the roofing, and then the floors, walls, ceiling finishes, the lighting fixtures that go in, the appliances like the refrigerators, the ranges, the microwaves. And then when people move into homes, what do? They buy new furniture, they buy televisions. So much of manufacturing is tied to having these new homes. How about utilities? If you got new homes, you need water, you need gas, you need wastewater, you need power. So the utility industry is really driven by expansion of residential developments. Once you start to get a critical mass together, mega neighborhoods or multiple neighborhoods located in clusters, well, that starts to drive the retail. And, the first is probably the gas and guzzle, 7-Eleven, Royal Farms. Bill and I are both in Pennsylvania as it happens, and so this is Wawa and Sheets Land up here. Maybe get some small strip centers that follow with the Italian restaurant and the insurance provider. Schools pay massive attention to what's happening within their districts because if you have new residential development, that means new families. If you have new families, that means school renovations, school expansions, maybe even greenfield, brand new schools that are constructed. And then finally, healthcare. Healthcare pre-COVID, post-COVID, the hub and spoke is alive and well. You limit traffic at the major hospitals and you push it out closer to the consumers. In the doc in the box, urgent care, primary care clinics, they might start in those strip centers and then end up out in the parking lot or somewhere nearby in a standalone facility. So we want to pay attention to that. And so again, if we were together, we would raise your hand and ask you to raise your hands and say, okay, how many people now think we should be paying attention to this? And of course, it's 100% of hands. There are all sorts of metrics out there that we could be tracking, the housing market. How about the inventory change? A year ago, inventory was really low. Prices were skyrocketing for purchasing existing homes. It was driving the need for new home construction. And now in some markets, we're seeing a softening of demand for single family homes, and that's reducing demand for new residential developments to go in. Bottom left there is just the purchase application index, and it's trended out from 1990. So you really see that real estate bubble that occurred 2004, 5, 6, right before the economy kind of went south big time, which you see here. And we've never recovered since that point. And then just a couple graphics that show you can really drill down into metropolitan areas. Here we're showing you new listings and closed sales in different markets. So there's a lot of data out there. If you are looking into geographic expansion, looking in new markets, this is what you want to look at because this is a really good indicator. We also have, you're looking at the National Association of Home Builders, their market index. Which you can see has been in a bit of a free fall here the past couple of months. Right now, we're where we were in May 2020, but in May 2020, we were on the upswing that happened after that big COVID drop. Housing units under construction on the bottom left there, but really what's interesting, this one on the right here, the share of total homes purchased by investors. More than 25% of investors are purchasing housing, and they are sitting on it. These single family homes, that's what the SF is. They are charging exorbitant rates to rent them. And what this is doing is it's pushing out younger buyers. They can't afford these houses when more than a quarter of it is controlled by investors that aren't owner occupied. like we said, there's so much other data points out there beyond residential. You can see the inflation on the top left. You can see the unemployment claims on the bottom left. And where it was in the early days of COVID to where it's been the past few months. I mean, really, just before COVID hit and that recession, and now we're talking about record levels since the late 1960s with how low unemployment is. That as you're trying to recruit staff, a lot of you are still struggling with that. And then the census graphic I love. It's looking at population changes for states from July 20 to July 21, all color coded. Well, Bill and I were in the Rust Belt, so you're seeing the orange colors there that's showing population declines. Sun Belt, typically big drivers of population increases, but in some states that's relevant, in some states that's not. But if you look at New York, Illinois, California, you're looking at 3 to 4, actually 4 major metropolitan areas in New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. A big exodus from these cities has led to a population decline. But also don't misinterpret this. It's not all about American citizens. The negative immigration that we've had the past couple of years due to COVID has really negatively impacted population change in the United States. And then, of course, we have all these other sources. Pick your favorite business book, business journal, magazine, whatever it is that you regularly read. It could be websites you monitor, it could be podcasts you listen to, or video blogs that you watch. These are great resources for us to monitor trends that are happening in the marketplace.
Scott, that's a good overview of that, the global marketplace, those macroeconomic trends. And some of those we could easily apply to our industry, like inflation and labor that you mentioned. But you actually started in the AEC industry research. You started talking about the demographic shifts and the home building component. And really, that's the first area of the AEC industry that we could do some research on. In fact, those two graphs on the left here of this screen were actually taken from the US government through the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the one in the upper left is actually construction spending over the last 30 years. And if you take a look at that, you'll see the red line, the residential, closely mimics what you were referencing earlier, Scott, in terms of residential construction. People sometimes don't realize that the largest component of the design and construction world is the residential market, and it's primarily single family homes. We don't think of that. But look at that spike back in 06, which was back when we had the Great Recession shortly thereafter. And again, Scott mentioned some things about the recession. I don't claim to be an economist by any means. You see the spike even higher on residential when you come to today's date. But I think the economy is very different than it was in 06, 07, 08. But take a look at the non-residential, the public, the blue and the gold lines on that particular chart. You'll notice that if you take back in 06 and add up the red, the blue, and the yellow line there, if you will, we're over $1 trillion, which made us the second largest component of the GDP in America. And it took us a while before you could add the numbers for the red, blue, and yellow to total $1 trillion once again. So we're finally back on that road. The lower left looks at that year-over-year change in those three markets as well. So a lot of what Scott was talking about with the global research, that the macroeconomic stuff directly impacts many segments of our market. But there's some other things too. If you look on the right, the lower right, the Dodge Momentum Index, which is published on a monthly basis ever since the year 2000 for the last 22 years, by Dodge, who is, many of you know, a large research-based entity within our industry. And what they did was they established an index of 100 back in 2000, and ever since then, on a monthly basis, any new projects that are announced, and that's the key word here, announced, they will add into their calculation. So it's very much, in my mind, an ultra-leading indicator for us, because what happens when a large project like Hudson Yards in New York and sort of large infrastructure projects that are coming out now are announced, they're added into this, but yet don't materialize for design and construction for months or years later. So it's a good indicator for us as to what's happening in our industry. The upper part, just briefly, those The chart on the right and the table on the left, or the graph, are published by ABC, the Associated Builders and Constructors, which is a trade organization on the construction side of our industry of general contractors, trade contractors, et cetera, showing on the blue bars the backlog, which you see dipped a little bit in terms of months of backlog at construction companies, not dramatically, but it also shows you some opinions in red, green, and purple there, that they asked the owners of these construction companies, this month compared to last month, do you think sales are going to go up or down? Do you think profit margins are going to go up or down? Do you think staffing levels are going to go up or down? And although it's opinion, it's opinion based on educated individuals' opinions. And if you take a look there at the curves for the last couple of months there, you're seeing a little bit of a downward trend, but notice it's still above the 50 index, which still means it's positive, just not as positive as it once was. So all this information is available. We're going to provide links to a lot of it, but we could drill down even further and look at some other tools that are out there as well. Upper left, some of you may know PSMJ Resources, a research entity within our industry. They publish a quarterly market forecast where they interview engineers and architects and ask them questions regarding, similar to the ABC, on a quarterly basis, have your revenues increased or decreased? Has your backlog increased or decreased? And most importantly, what makes it a leading indicator, has the number of proposal opportunities increased or decreased this quarter compared to last quarter? That cover you see on the left is actually not even released yet. This particular market forecast is being released tomorrow. We got an advanced copy. I will tell you that number regarding the projections for proposal opportunities is still very positive. It's dropped down that it has the last quarter, but the last quarter, the first quarter of the year, was abnormally high, believe it or not. So it's where you would think it might be at this point. Upper right, FMI does it more on the construction side and the engineering side. Fields Management Institute, quarterly basis, publish their outlook. They take a deeper dive, not just in our industry, but in our clients' industries, and break it down by wastewater, bridges, medical centers, et cetera. A very good publication. And again, we'll provide you links with all this. The bottom row is from AIA, American Institute of Architects. On the right side, their Billings Index. Many of you are familiar with that. They do that on a monthly basis. Again, it's an index, much like these other ones. They ask 3 questions of owners of architectural firms. Has your revenue increased or decreased? Has your backlog increased or decreased? And have the number of inquiries, which they classify, which they term the request for proposals, increased or decreased? So it's also somewhat a leading indicator. And you see some of the results of the billing side of that index. Lastly, lower left, AIA also takes a lot of this information I just mentioned and compiles an interactive consensus forecast. You're able to go on there, that's a screenshot, but you're able to go in and check those 8 different sources as well as a consensus to find what the forecast might be for the various submarkets we're in. Once again, the link for that will be provided. But then there's some more research you can do. Years ago, when I got interested in the research and the strategy side of this industry, I subscribed to dozens of magazines. I literally went to the library to research some information on the Census Bureau, et cetera. Well, now most of that's online. On the top line, ENR, Engineering News Record, Building Design and Construction, 2 Bibles of the industry that have links. If you see the drop downs there, the menu that go to reports and research that they've done. Lower right, a fairly new online publication, Construction Broadsheet. The lower left there, Construction Dive. We're going to talk a little more about that in a little bit when we get to Filter. So a lot of different sources that you could go out there and start researching about us and our industry, some more leading than others. So hopefully we touched on a couple that are leading. But then we got to look at our clients' industries, because that's really what matters. Where are we going to get work? And I got to believe that's one of the goals, as Scott mentioned earlier, for going through this particular process. So we thought we'd just briefly hit on a couple of the industries that you might be involved in. The first one I'll bring up is infrastructure. It's on everybody's mind, and we've been talking about it for the last year or more with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You could read through the 1,100-page document if you'd like. Here's a couple of summaries. You could find them all over the internet On the left side, you see a bar chart indicating the breakdown of the funds for various infrastructure components. On the right, you see its impact on the percentage of GDP in the US, if and when that's all spent, or when that's all spent. And you can see it's still below the amount of spending on infrastructure we had back in the New Deal, but it's definitely a much needed expenditure. But there's more information you could find on infrastructure, be it online. Go to your state government, the federal government. They're only too happy to share with you what those dollar amounts are and what the process might be for local municipalities or local entities or states to actually access those funds and what the specific projects are. If you go on Amtrak's site, you see on the left side is you actually get, it's about a 150-page document, and it outlines basically their budget. What are they going to do with their component of the infrastructure money? It's not just repairing existing, it's new lines. There's dozens of new lines they're going to put in, all requiring stations. So there's vertical construction as well as the horizontal rail construction. You could go through the DEP, you could go through all the various aviation and so forth online and find that information all available. So infrastructure has a lot of it. On the right, just a quick graphic, the Water Infrastructure Improvement for the Nation Act, originally passed a decade ago, keep having extensions of that particular funding source to basically provide funds for water systems around the country. So this information is readily available out there, and you can even supplement it by research with magazines, which are now obviously all digital, not just a hard copy in the mail. But you could go online and check it out. The granddaddy of them all is Roads and Bridges magazines, which has been out there. Some great research articles that they present, including, you see the headline for this week's publication about all 50 states submitted plans for a national electric vehicle charging network. So there's going to be a lot that comes out of that. I think it was $7 billion earmarked for that. American Infrastructure Magazine, Informed Infrastructure. There are dozens, some focused on specific components such as rail, etc. So it's a quick overview of the infrastructure role. But how about the vertical market? If you're in higher education, college and university, there's some great publications out there as well. You see the lower left, American School and University, lower right, Spaces for Learning. Both do quarterly and annual research reports as to what's happening, what are the trends with colleges, with learning institutions around the country. The top, Chronicle of Higher Education. President, I will place bets, the president of every college and university in this country reads that. Great insight regarding things like endowment, master planning, strategic planning for colleges. Great source of information as well. But then diving in deeper as to organizations that we might be involved in. If you're involved in college and university, SCUP, Society for College and University Planners, and APA, the Association of Physical Plan Administrators, both made up of higher education employees, both conduct continuous research into trends on college campuses. In the middle there, that particular one is for New York State, but a number of states have organizations for their independent colleges and universities that also do reports looking at trends, not only spatial trends on their campuses, but as I mentioned earlier, endowment and financial trends as well. There's other industries as well, industry, manufacturing. Scott, you know that market.
Yeah, I spent much of my career with a design build group of companies that really focused on industry. And we had certain sectors in there that, we drilled down to a little more. But of course, Industry Week, that was a Bible for us to understand the trends. And Industry Week also publishes every year the plan of the year. So what are the trends in construction? What are going into these plants? Important for information for us to know. Because again, we're trying to gain a competitive advantage. We're trying to make sure we're meeting the market where the market's at. And so there was a lot of good information in here. But as a subset of manufacturing, we actually did a lot of food processing facilities. So, food engineering, food manufacturing, food processing, these are all magazines that have websites with tons of free content. And, they have the regular reports that they do. And one that I found so valuable every single year was one of these publications would do their annual capital spending report. And they would survey all these food manufacturing plants on how they were going to spend their dollars that year. And they would publish the top 10. And so for me, looking for business development messaging, for me, looking to develop thought leadership that was relevant to the audience, for me, looking for what to speak at shows or direct mail campaigns, it was right there because I knew where these owners were going to be focusing their dollar spends in the coming year. So great content available for free. You just had to know where to look for it. But as a subset of food processing, when you get down to it, we did a lot of confectionaries. You know, think the big three chocolate companies. We work there in a whole spin-off industry of companies that sell chocolate to the Hershey's, Nestle's, and Mars of the world. And so the National Confectionaries Association was important, and Candy and Snack Today put us in touch with a lot of the trends that confectionaries were paying attention to. Because if there's new products that are being developed, might need to create new process lines, repurpose existing process lines, build new facilities. So that was really important. And then this bottom right there, PMCA, the Professional Manufacturing Confectioners Association website, but also they do hold an annual conference, which I'm here in York, Pennsylvania. It's always held either in Lancaster or before that Hershey. So I was able to go to it every year. So it was part business development, go to the conference, meet new potential clients, but it was part market research. What are the trends? What are they talking about? Because this was a conference of our owners to other owners. So that was real critical as part of our research. So now we are going to roll into our first question, and we're going to ask you about how often you perform research. So Kaylee, take it away.
Sure thing, Scott. So the question is, how frequently do you perform research at your firm? Your options are once or twice per year, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and continuously. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll here, and I will keep it open till about 85% participation, or if a minute elapses. This is your first of 3 questions, and just a reminder that if you would like to request that CPE after this presentation, we need you to answer these. So looks about 70% of the crowd has voted so well or already, so we're doing good here. Alrighty, just need a few more clicks and then I will go ahead and share the results with everybody to see.
Survey says.
Survey says, let me go ahead and close it here and share with everybody. 52% of the crowd this afternoon say that they do it once or twice per year. Coming in second place is continuously, which is good news, I'm assuming, for you guys. 13% say monthly, 10% say quarterly, and 2% say weekly.
Interesting. Thanks, Kaylee. Thank you all for taking that poll. And you were right in your comment there. Continuously, which I believe was 24%, was a pretty strong showing for that. And it's obviously what we recommend. We understand the once or twice per year. That's fairly typical, but here's my comment. I think it's fairly easy to do it on a continuous basis. And that leads itself well to the next step in the funnel, in the process, and that's filtering through all this data. When you filter through it, it's basically you don't want to concentrate on the things that you don't need to concentrate on, trends that are not of interest, but you do want to focus on the ones that are impacting your firm, your clients' industries, your client companies, your client institutions. So that's really what we want to talk about and filter. And what we want to suggest, I showed earlier, the construction site or the website Construction Dive. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but it's basically an aggregator website. So on a continuous basis, they get articles that are published on the web, provide links to it, and post it on their website. You basically could go on their website and determine if it's something you want to look at. But here's the better part. You could subscribe to it, and I do. And every morning when I log on, I got an email with maybe 5, 6, 7 articles, if you will, that have been populated over previous 24 hours. I'm able to read a quick summary of it. And if it's something that I think impacts the research I'm doing or just has an interest to myself, I'll click on that and get some more information. It's a great way to filter through it, and that's construction. There's other dive components. You have dive in other industries, so it might be a client industry like healthcare dive they have, that if you're in the healthcare industry, you may want to subscribe to as well. The right to are actually emailed similar to that I subscribe to that are called smart briefs. These two are on the far right, AGC Smart Brief, the Association of General Contractors of America, and the one in the middle there is the Smart Brief for Civil Engineers by ASCE. Same type of thing. I get this every morning. I look at which ones might be of interest to me. For instance, I look at the AGC Smart Brief there on the right, which I believe was yesterday's. Not too interested in the $31 billion Ike Dike in Texas that got the Senate vote, so I wouldn't click on that particular one. But it's a great way to filter through as to what's important to you. It does a lot of the work for you. And the other comment I'll make too, when you're filtering through it, do some time management. Like I said, I get these, they typically come fairly early in the morning. This is as I'm powering up the computer and having that second cup of coffee and start doing some of that. So it allows you to do it on a continuous basis. Once you go through that filter, it's now time to interpret it. We got some tools, Scott.
All right. And, there are a number of different tools out there. Probably the one you're most familiar with is the SWOT analysis, or a more current version of that, the SOAR, where you add in aspirations and results. Typically, this is more common as part of maybe a strategic planning exercise. With the SWOT analysis, you're looking at strengths and weaknesses, which are internal. Then you're looking at opportunities and threats, which are external. We do see companies use these as a tool to interpret research and maybe help them enter a new marketplace that they're interested in using. But very common tool, probably of all of them, the one you're most familiar with. At the beginning of the program today, we spoke about the anticipatory organization, and we talked about this framework that they have with the hard trends and the soft trends, but there's all these tools that they provide as part of that that allow you to interpret the trends and what you're going to do with it. So, example there, the both and principle, right? We live in an either or world right now. And if you don't believe it, go to social media, pick your favorite, news channel on television. It's an either or world out there. This concept is both and. Why don't we have our cake and eat it too? What about the pre-mortem? So we have new knowledge. Let's talk about it and maybe make some informed decisions instead of trying something and then doing the post-mortem on the back end of it. Do we do the right thing? So another tool that you can be using to help interpret and really leverage the knowledge for these trends. Bill, the five forces.
Yeah, I was going to say another tool is the five forces system, which was developed by Michael Porter at Harvard a number of years ago. He's still a professor there, and he's kind of the guru of management and marketing and strategic competitive advantage. He basically said that industries, companies, or markets are influenced by five things. And based on those five things, they will determine if you're going to be successful. The first is the competitive rivalry, yourself and the competition among other firms or other industries. The top and the bottom on that particular graphic, potential new entry. What are the barriers to entry? If you look at the AEC industry, let's look at engineering. There's obviously a barrier to entry. You need to be a registered engineer to have a company and start a new entity. But other than that, there's not much of a barrier to entry. Substitutes, is there another substitute? Is design build a potential substitute for the mechanical engineer if they go through a mechanical contractor to do the design? And then lastly, the two forces on the horizontal. What's the power of the suppliers? What's the power of the buyers? And you see the supplier power on the construction side when it's a lump sum bid type thing where subcontractors really control the bulk of the dollar value for a GC's bid. Buyers, you get some large buyers of services and they have a lot of buying power, if you will. There's other tools you could use as well. Scenario planning, in my mind, is more of an overlay type thing where you look at various scenarios and look at your entire strategy and see how it's impacted. You may look at, say, maybe a few years ago about the dollar value of the barrel of oil. And if it goes up to X, what might happen to the industry or your client base? What if it goes X plus 25, et cetera? Or in this particular graphic, what about right now with the a potential recession? What happens if the economy continues to grow? What if it grows at a different rate? What if it stalls? What if it declines? How might that impact certain subsegments of your market, of your client base, if you will?
And now we'll jump into the tool that we really love, the steeple pestle analysis. You might be familiar with this. It originated as the pest analysis and it grew from there. And there's at least a dozen different versions of it out there. now. But essentially, this is a way that you look at trends, the way you look at markets, and you filter the information based upon social concerns, technological, economic issues, environmental, political, and then legal. And so that's the steeple or the pestle. It's the same thing. So we're going to talk a little more in depth about this on the back end, but we wanted to ask you another question now. So we're going to ask you about what tools you are using right now. So Kaylee, I'm tagging you in.
Alrighty, I'm here and the poll is open. So your options are SWOT or SOAR, AO framework, 5 forces or scenario planning, the steeple or the pestle, and analysis is not performed. So as with the last one, I'll keep this open until we get sufficient participation or if a minute elapses. This is your second of 3 reminder to answer this poll for me if you're looking for that CPE credit this afternoon.
Bill, what are you thinking here? What are we going to
You know,
see?
I was just going to ask you that. I'm curious what the responses are. I think I know where it's going to go, but let me see if I'm incorrect. I don't want to sway the votes.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and close and share so you can get your answer there, Bill.
Sounds good. Oh, interesting.
1% SWOT or the SOAR. 24% say that they don't perform an analysis. 8% say AO framework, 5% say the steeple, and 2% say 5 forces or scenario planning.
You know, that's interesting. I would have thought analysis not performed might be a little higher. SWOT, of course, is the basic analysis tool, if you will, and it kind of doesn't surprise me it came in number 1, but I'd be curious if they're doing it to analyze their client's market as well.
So, you know, I'm not surprised either. I'm pleased to see it was only a quarter that aren't doing it. But, you know, obviously we're fans of the anticipatory organization framework. So deal for you today. If you want a free copy of the book, put a note in on your survey at the end of our program today. Just please send me a copy of the book and we'll make sure you get a free copy. So talking a little now, a little more in depth about Steeple, because we think there's a lot of value in this tool. If you happen to join us for the anticipatory business development planning webinar we had not quite a year ago, we talked about the value of this tool there as well. But let's go in a little more depth here. So what is social? Well, this is the demographics, like we talked about, the aging baby boomers and aging Xers and aging millennials and aging Gen Z, the newest members of our workforce. Lifestyles, education attainment or unattainment, media, what's happening in culture is all part of that social aspect of the tool.
You know, technological, I mean, it's kind of easy to comprehend, but it applies to so many different industries, and hopefully you can think about it a little bit. How is the research and development act? How is automation? It's not just for manufacturing. How is automation impacting your client's industry? What about that speed of change in terms of technology? How is that changing either how you do your work as a designer and contractor or how your client is? And lastly, that whole communication system, how's that impacting how your clients are doing work?
As you're looking at a trend or a market and you go to this economic filter now, of course, what's happening in the economy and the interest rates, inflation, obviously on all of our minds right now, that's really driving the material costs. But how about labor availability? And this is by profession, this is by title, this is by geographic region. There are all sorts of subsets of that. And of course, you know, how much does it cost for energy right now?
And that's actually a good segue to environmental, because energy is closely related to environmental. But what's environmental impact on, again, your client base? How is climate change affecting the location? How is it affecting the design? How is it affecting the form and function of the entity that we're designing and building? But what about resiliency and sustainability? You know, the whole issue with climate change impacts to shoreline structures. How is that impacting your particular marketplace?
And of course, now politics, you know, Bill, I was going to say everybody's favorite topic, but you got legal coming up next. So yeah, I don't know, it's a toss up with these, but obviously what's happening with the government, with the regulations that they're passing, with the funding that they're putting in place. How about the taxes that we're paying? This is federal, this is state, this is local. What are the labor laws or potential trade restrictions or restraints of trade? Hey, political uncertainty, hello 2022. Then the stimulus funds that may still exist, stimulus funds that may be passed again in the future, and other incentives that are out there.
You know, you hinted at it, Scott, that originally political and legal were intertwined. It used to be called a steep analysis, then they broke it out. But legal could be its own set of conditions, if you will. Legal requirements for, again, your client base, what licensures might be required for yourself, for the client base as well. And all those laws and regulations, which are tied to politics, obviously, for health, safety, welfare, employment, business, et cetera. So we went through that fairly quickly because what we want to do is we want to apply via a quick exercise those thought processes to 6 different client markets and talk about what it is we're implying and show you via example. So let's walk through that exercise.
And with that, we're going to start with social, and let's use this as multifamily. Again, you would, if you work in the multifamily market, if you are looking to move into it, you would apply this filter through all these elements of the steeple. We're just going to kind of show you examples of different market sectors. So for multifamily, yeah, we're worried about the demographics. We're going to pay attention to that. And guess what? The millennials are still renting at pretty significant rates for their age. The oldest millennials are around age 40. 40 to 45% of them are homeowners. At age 40, more than 60% of Gen Xers were homeowners. Almost 70% of baby boomers were homeowners. 73% of the silent generation were homeowners. So massive shift in home ownership over the generations. Because of that, we're seeing, yes, millennials and other generations want to rent, but they don't want to live in multifamily housing necessarily. So these multifamily housing developers are pivoting to essentially single family residential neighborhoods in certain geographic areas of the country. We saw with COVID a lot of exodus from the largest urban areas. It wasn't far away. It was to the suburbs or the exurbs, which is that next ring around the suburbs that has more rural character, but you can still be downtown in a large city within an hour. Remote work, that's changing the way buildings are designed and constructed in multifamily. Do you need co-work spaces? Do you need offices within the actual apartment units? Do you need better enhanced technology? And, family units are staying longer in the rentals. It used to be, a single person would move into the apartment and then maybe they'd get married. Bill and I were debating earlier, are they still called dinks, the dual income, no kids? But yeah, that was pretty natural. The couples would marry or move in together, and then eventually they might move out and buy a house and start a family. But now, because that's just not available to a lot of millennials right now, they're starting their families and having children within these multifamily housing developments. So it's changing the character of them.
Let's look at the technological filter and maybe apply it to the medical world, the healthcare world, and that client base for us. And boy, we could all relate to all the technology and how it impacts the delivery of care, but then how that impacts facilities that we design and build. Things like teledoc and communication with the specialist that might be in other facilities, how that's not requiring additional space. However, the communication with specialists in other facilities, a lot of larger healthcare systems that have multiple hospitals as part of their system may have specialists only in a couple of the facilities, and they're treating patients from far away via basically cameras and interactivity. How's that impacting in terms of the space requirements in ICUs or in doctors' offices? What's the impact of COVID and virus and monkeypox, the whole viral exchange with the mechanical systems? This was a big talking point at the beginning of COVID. It will continue to impact. Robotic surgery, the surgeon does not have to be in the room or even the building when performing surgery. How's that impacting space requirements? Or as I mentioned earlier, I just don't want my surgeon in another building if he loses his Wi-Fi connection. But all that technological concerns, home care technology, that's so advanced. We're keeping individuals out of hospitals and nursing homes because of the advancements in technology. That's great in many respects, but how does it impact what you and I do in terms of designing and building healthcare facilities?
Now let's jump into the industrial market sector and look at some of the economic indicators and variables we should be paying attention to. And obviously, there's the supply chain challenges. I live just a couple miles from the Harley-Davidson final assembly plant, and it was big news a couple months ago when they had to shut down for 2 weeks, not due to a lack of demand for their motorcycles, but they could not get the parts to build the motorcycles. The reshoring of manufacturing with all these products that are stuck in China or not even coming out of China because of their COVID lockdowns, we're seeing a lot of manufacturers relocate their manufacturing operations to other countries, including back in the United States. Or what about the last mile fulfillment? How we get products that are sent to us through the mail, that last mile, it might be the vacant JCPenney that is converted into a warehouse, or even a grocery store that focuses on delivery. Softening consumer sentiment. We're scared about what's going to happen with the economy. We hold off on making purchases that could impact manufacturing negatively. We talked about, the importance of monitoring home construction rates on our industry. Well, that impacts manufacturing as well. And then, those indicators for inflation, interest rates, etc.
Looking at the environmental filter and applying it to office buildings, the commercial office environment. The indoor air quality, been a big deal for a number of years with aging mechanical systems. How is that impacting that particular market sector and or work in it? We talk about green offices. It was a big selling tool a while back for developers to say that they had a certified building, and that was a big selling point for them. Now, with people just slowly getting back into a hybrid work environment, and people or office buildings in urban core areas have a difficult time, now they're talking about things like making sure there's a lot of green space, even in urban areas, for taking walks, having lunch, sitting down, having that outdoor experience, if you will. How's that impacting what we do as designers and contractors? I mentioned resilient design earlier, being able to disaster-proof those buildings that are office buildings that are near or some of our waterways. You saw the disaster that was done in Kentucky recently with the flooding. Same type of thing. These are all impacting not only the corporate office, but many market segments as well.
Within the political filter or lens that we're looking through here, obviously the infrastructure that Bill spoke to, but there's a lot of pressures for funding public transportation, which is getting in worse and worse condition. And speaking of bad condition, how about these 46,000 bridges that none of us want to drive over? We just wish there were signs there telling us you might die if you drive over this bridge. But there's a lot of money that needs to be spent there. So if this is your market sector, you want to be paying attention to that. How about moving towards electrification? There are a lot of laws being passed, California, Arizona, other states that are moving away from gas, both on the commercial side and the residential side. How about states are still giving but lessening their matching fund requirements for lead services, lead pipe replacement? And of course, a lot of states are sitting on a ton of money right now from the pandemic relief funding that they have yet to release.
Let's look at the higher education market and take a look at the legal filter on that. Those of you who might not be familiar with the acronym PILOT, but it's payments in lieu of taxes. Most colleges and universities are nonprofit entities, but they are being approached by the college town or the city that they're located in to make contributions because they're using city municipal services. But then what's happening with those funds? How is that being reallocated back into the college campus or the neighboring environment? Are there opportunities there? Not so much higher education, but private school, K through 12, the voucher programs. A number of states are allowing private school and charter schools to accept vouchers given by the public school system. How's it going to impact potential opportunities for building projects for all of us? A number of other things, Title IX, diversity, equity, inclusion requirements, all can have impact on facility types, facility locations. Campus crime, another related to legal aspect. We all go on college campus, you see the blue lights around campus for safety, but how does it impact lighting? How does it impact building layout? How does it impact building design so you don't have places where individuals could hide or stalk individuals type thing? So all this impacts what we have. We want to get to this because what we have is help. We have some help that we're able to share a worksheet with you, which is in the handouts. This is what it looks like. It's in an A3 format, in a lean technique environment that basically summarizes the 6 letters of the acronym STEEPLE, and has the various sub-bullets, sub-filters that Scott and I have come up with. And we've actually put on the sheet here that you could use this to look. So take one of these worksheets, use it to analyze bridges, dams, correctional facilities, whatever market you might be in, to have this discussion and make your strategic plan more effective. Last thing we want to hit on really quick, because we're up against time, is the last step you want to do is recommend. We suggest actually developing environmental scans and creating reports, whether it's like on the left, a 14-page document that's distributed, or on the right, an A3 two-sided 11x17 summary that's distributed to senior leadership, coworkers, whatever it might be, complete with recommendations as to what came out of your research, what came out of your trend spotting, if you will. With that, our last question before we wrap it up. We want to ask about how effective your research is, and I turn over to Kaylee.
Alrighty, so the last poll is open. Your answers are very effective, somewhat effective, and not effective at all. So how effective are your current research efforts towards identifying trends? I'll leave it open for a few moments here and then let the guys end the webinar and send you on your way. So we're already at 80%.
Excellent.
Just need a few more clicks and I'll go ahead and shut it down and share the results. Alrighty, so about 80% say somewhat effective, 11% say not at all, and 9% say very effective.
Interesting. Well, we want to get that 9% up to 99% very effective. And we suggest using some of the tools like the worksheet you have in the handout, but also taking a look at some of the resources. There's 2 slides with clickable links that you'll be provided, taking you to a lot of the research that we showed, not all of it, just in the interest of space and time, but a number of those resources. But with that, we're going to wrap it up and see if anybody has any last minute questions before you have to run out.
I'm not seeing any questions in there. I know Jennifer asked for the materials to be sent to her, and I'm doing that right this second. So with that, Scott, any final words?
I just really hope this was of value to you. Please watch this again, share it with your colleagues, use the tools that we talked about. And don't forget, if you go on to the Stamp on Us website, whether through the Strategic Growth Advisory or through the events on demand, you can access lots and lots of webinars.
With that, the last slide's got our contact information. It'll be on the slide deck that you receive as well.
Thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thank you all.